Welcome to Firsts in Fiction, your first stop for learning to write fantastic fiction. I'm your host, Aaron Gansky, author of The Bargain, the Hand of Adonai series, Who is Harrison Sawyer, Firsts in Fiction, and other books.
And I am joining them today. I am Tina Yeager. I am author of Beautiful Warrior, Finding Victory Over the Lies Formed Against You. I'm also host of the podcast Flourishment, and I'm a speaker and a mentor with Word Weavers International, and I'm licensed as a mental health counselor, and I'm a life coach.
Terrific. I am Molly Jo Riley. I am the moderator of the podcast. I am also the author of the romantic mystery book, Nola.
And
it's still exciting after 7 years to stop saying the upcoming or work in progress. It's even months later, it's still very exciting to just say, yes, this is a book.
Indeed. You have probably noticed, those of you who are watching, then those of you listening have not heard Tessa's wonderful voice or seen her wonderful face. So she was unable to join us tonight due to a scheduling conflict. But we hope to have her back on again soon at some point. But for tonight, you got the three of us, and we.
Yay.
Yeah, wow, that sounded really enthusiastic, Molly.
I didn't want to interrupt you, but since it did interrupt you, woohoo! We are all here! Yay!
It's a little bit. I was starting to feel, too proud of myself, and then, thanks for bringing me back down.
So, I do what I can.
Tonight we're taking a look at our best self-editing practices. And this is something that I talk with my students a lot about. I'm sure we all do. I find myself saying this far more recently to my students because I'm collecting more work from them. And I keep telling them, stop giving me work that you haven't read. If you don't want to read the essay that you just wrote, I definitely don't want to read the essay that you just wrote. So make sure that you read it before you submit it. But the same kind of goes for us as writers. We need to make sure we are our first line of defense, so to speak. We've all heard the old adage of crummy first drafts, or some other word to describe.
Derogatory, descriptive word.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's true. Our first drafts are garbage, and that's fine. They have to be, because first we have to have it before we can mold it into something beautiful and wonderful. And so what we're about to talk about is what we do after we've completed that first draft. How do we make it better before we even send it off to an editor? So of course we're doing things like we're grammar check, spell check. We're going to make sure that we've dotted all our I's and crossed all our T's, both proverbially and literally. But then what do we do beyond that? How do we go from our less than stellar first draft to something a little more, a little stronger? So Tina, do you want to start off here? What are some of the things that you like to do when you're doing your first draft edits?
Well, you need to kind of know where your weak spots are. So while you're doing everything that you would normally do in the draft, you need to know what you have a tendency to have as a bad habit. Are you biting your writer nails on your page? Are you using to be verbs? If you are, then you need to search and destroy those. Like am, is, are, was, were. Search for all of those and destroy them. If you have a tendency to over-describe, look for all your ly words and destroy those. Making sure that you know what those bad habits are. If you have a favorite word, sometimes I have like a word that I start to really like too much, and I echo it everywhere. I'm just really loving iridescent, and everything's iridescent, because I just am loving that word for the week. And I have to go through and kind of cut back on my use of the same words over and over again. So I also like checking my dialogue to make sure I'm not overusing certain action tags or certain dialogue tags. You want to have them be invisible, or you want to make sure that you use a few action tags to ground the reader in the scene, but you don't need to have an action tag every time. I have a tendency to want to do them every time. And so I can go back and pull a few of them out so I can just have a little back and forth dialogue. There's only 2 people. But please, if you are a new writer, one of the things that I used to do as a new writer was write creative little vocal things. She said in a sultry voice. Well, don't say things like that in your dialogue tags. Make sure that you just said or asked, and then you can describe that a different way. Or he hissed, or she sibilated, or something very creative like that. And it sounds great if you're a new writer until you realize that editors really hate that. So watch for those dialogue tags. And then, making sure that you do use something in your dialogue to ground the reader there, using some powerful sensory details. What they're doing while they're talking can help establish characterization. It can keep them in the setting, and it can create some symbolic things that set the mood for the scene as well. So making sure that you're using your dialogue well would be those would be my do's. Are we going on to don'ts at the same
Well,
time, or are we going to wait and come back and do those later?
I'd actually like to kind of piggyback on that, because you spoke a lot about dialogue, and that's what I'm working on with my creative writing class currently, and it's something that I'm doing in my own edits that I'm working on currently. And I aim to take out 75% of my dialogue. Now, you might think that's hyperbole. You might think that's a cat in the background meowing.
I'm sorry.
You'd
That
be
was
right
Iris
about
saying hello.
You'd be right about one of those 2 things. I'm at school, so I don't have my cats in tow. Otherwise, I'm sure they would be right here knocking my mic over. But I know that sounds like a high number, but I'm really ruthless with dialogue, and I think that we all should be, because I consider the ground between the quotation marks to be sacred ground and holy ground. And if it's weak dialogue, you absolutely want to get rid of it, because dialogue is very easy to do poorly. It's very hard to do well. And so you want to resist the urge to think that you are God's gift to dialogue. Most of us are not. Most of us really struggle with it. And so I try and take out every single word that I possibly can. And what that does is it makes the dialogue a little more, it keeps the kind of the action rolling. It doesn't slow it down or pull the reader out of the story. It allows things to kind of keep going at a good clip. And it also sounds more natural, even though we don't speak in such short, choppy sentences. We end up saying things like well, like, gee, and taking those out strengthens what's left. And so that's kind of one of the things that I do is, and so I'm glad to hear you talk about dialogue in that way. Is I'm really ruthless with it, especially with whatever is inside the quotation marks. You got to leave only what is absolutely necessary, and that's what makes it powerful.
I don't think we want to use dialogue exactly the way we speak anyway, right?
Correct. Yeah, it's one of those weird things where it has to sound natural, but it's not natural. And the way you accomplish that is by, again, really kind of clipping it and tightening tightening it up. There we go. That's better. Molly, you were going to say something.
I was going to say, you commented on weak dialogue, and then you went on to about cutting words. What are other ways that dialogue can be weak other than overstating? Like Tina said, we don't write dialogue the way we speak it. We want to kind of cut to the chase. So other than cutting out superfluous words, what are other ways that dialogue can be weak? Also, this is Iris.
Hello, Iris. There are lots of ways for dialogue to be weak. The point Tina was making about dialogue tags, that's one area where dialogue does get weaker. Anything outside of the quotation marks that calls attention to what's inside of it is distracting. It's like having a big flashing neon sign. And if I may be so, I'm getting really grumpy apparently. It's almost insulting, because it's like, you're telling me how to read the words. If you put the right words in the dialogue, you don't have to tell me how to read them. I'll know, right? If we want to say something she said in a sultry voice, whatever's inside those quotation marks better be sultry. And I should read it and go, oh, right? You don't
Okay.
want to say he screamed angrily. Like, well, I'm going to get that from the exclamation point at the end of, when it says look out, exclamation point. Nobody's whispering that, right? And so that's what I do is I try and not weaken it by what's outside of it. And I try to keep it strong by not putting too much inside of it. But Tina, how do you handle that?
I agree with that. I would say also sometimes you can use dialogue to help move the action forward and develop characters. But if you develop your characters well, you don't have to do a lot of cheap things with your dialogue because we'll know how they're supposed to sound. And I think another thing we didn't say about dialogue is being careful with dialect in your dialogue. You want to do a little bit to season your script, but you don't want to do so much that it drowns it in hot pepper.
That's very true, Tina. And I wrote, NOLA obviously set in New Orleans. It had several different kinds of accents. And my editor, which you both know, Yolanda Smith, she just came back to me and said, trust the reader to understand that this is going to be spoken in dialect or with that accent or whatnot. I don't have to do it all the time. And, of course, I'm like, no, but I'm the writer and I need to make sure they understand this. And once I step back and realize what she was saying and took a look at it for the self-editing, it made a lot of sense. And I was very grateful for that advice.
Yeah. Well said. Another thing that I like to do is I like to cut out all my cliches. First drafts are a breeding ground for cliches. And that's okay as long as we go back and we cut them out. So I try and identify those wherever I can, and I'll sometimes even tag them myself. I'll write it in my first draft and then leave a comment like, come on, I can do better than this. But I don't want to interrupt the creative flow. And so I'll have to make sure that when I'm going through my first draft that I'm finding those weak descriptions that are not only cliches like her tears fell like rain or whatever, my love is like a rose or some nonsense like that. I also look for what has become cliche in my writing, kind of as Tina was pointing out earlier. Everything becomes iridescent. Like it's possible to create your own cliches within a text if you're not careful. And so I think we all do that. You talk about dialogue tags or action tags for dialogue. My poor characters, not so much. They all look like bobblehead dolls. I just have every character nodding every third sentence. They're all just getting dizzy, reading that. And so I got to try and cut some of that stuff out. But yeah, I look for the cliches. Dialogue is where I do a lot of that. And for me, one of the first things that I do, one of the most important things that I do is I look for my sneaky prose killers. And that's a list of words that really weaken the writing. Some of them are adverbs like the LYs. Some of them are sneaky adverbs like just and maybe. They don't end in LY, but adverbs nonetheless. I've got a whole list of them, which you can Google. We've talked about them before on the podcast, but I have that list handy and I go over it every single time, and it takes forever. And my work is always better for it. So it's worth the time.
And you've not only we've done one or two podcasts on it because the podcast is a couple of years old now, but you've also written a blog post on it. So best option is just to Google Aaron Gansky sneaky prose killers. And then you're going to hit all of those articles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was actually a list that was given to me by Diana Flegel. She was my agent at the time. And I was originally resentful that she had sent this to me and said, my writing is amazing. Don't you know anything? I've got a master's degree. Look at me. Then I went through it and I was like, oh, wow. Oh, this is bad. And that process was very enlightening for me. It's a good process to grow through because you do learn quite a bit.
Interesting. Very good. Sorry, I had a little cat that was interfering a little bit. So sorry about that. One of my editing tips is to use the search and replace, but to do a bulk search and replace, but only do it if you're certain it'll work. Because Aaron, you have a story about when you did that on Hannah Bad and I.
Yeah, I had a character named Kara, Kara, and I also had an island called Eukara or Eukara Island, Eukara, and uh, I also had a character named Erica. So one of my early readers said Erica and Kara sound too much alike. You might want to change it. So I changed Kara to Lauren. Um, and on my read through, I found a lot of references to Lauren Island, um, which is not what I was hoping for at all. So there is an option in Microsoft Word that says match whole word only. So you can make sure that's on there if you want to swap one word for another throughout a text. Thanks for bringing that up, Molly.
You're welcome, Aaron. Well, learn from the masters. That's what we're here for.
Yeah.
I don't trust technology enough to do a search and replace. I'll go through each one and make sure I want to search and replace it, because otherwise
Yep.
I'm afraid something like that will happen. So I never
We-
actually do that.
in the first draft of NOLA, one of the characters' name was Lance and another character was Lou. So we changed Lance to Douglas. And so all of a sudden, instead of a character glancing across the room, they got Douglas across the room. And when medical personnel responded, the Ambu Douglas drove up with flashing lights.
Oh,
That's
what
awesome.
a fascinating story that would have been.
Right?
That's really embarrassing, Molly. Wow. So embarrassing.
Well, again, I learned from the master.
Indeed, indeed.
Hmm.
So what do you try and avoid when you guys are doing your self-editing? Is there anything that you try not to do?
Kill myself. Oh.
That is good. Yeah, we should probably disclaimer. That is one thing you don't want to do when you're editing. It's sometimes the first thing that we think of. Resist that urge. Be strong.
I think you also need to take a step back from your work before you edit it. Give yourself enough time before your deadline so that you can finish one draft, give a little time away to give yourself perspective so you're not too attached to it. Then you'll do a better job editing it, because you can get really attached to your iridescent pieces and not be willing to kill your darlings. And you may need to kill some of your darlings, especially those long. You have to know yourself and what things you tend to get attached to. I love poetry, so those long descriptive sensory images, I can get really attached to those and not want to kill them until I've taken a step back and realized how ugly those darlings really are, because they're way too long and they've slowed down the story, and I need to chop them into little pieces and move them into different places so they're not in one big lump somewhere. So know yourself, know what your tendencies are, and be willing to step back for a minute so that you can see clearly what you're doing wrong.
Yeah.
I agree. My big don't is don't assume that it's your agent / publisher / editor's job to fix your manuscript. If you want to present yourself as a professional, that means taking ownership and control of your own writing from right out the gate. So if you need help with it, you want first eyes on it, ask a trusted friend, family member, or mentor, but don't put it out there like a submission unless you have gone through all these self-editing steps.
Mm-hmm. And I would argue that you need to do it multiple times. I don't send anything to an editor or a publisher or an agent until I have personally gone over it a minimum of two times. And I'll typically, if I can, get another pair of eyes on it, an alpha reader, or possibly a beta reader before I start, seriously sending things out for submissions. It sounds tedious. It is tedious. And quite honestly, it's the one thing that you can do that's going to immediately make you a better writer. The better you get at editing, the better you're going to become. The better you're going to get at writing. There's a direct correlation between the two, and I'm seeing that more and more as I go on. The best rewriters are the best writers.
Yes, and the cheaper your editing will be. The more you do self-editing, the less you're going to have to pay your editor. So you're saving yourself a lot of money by doing self-editing.
That's true. So invest in yourself and take the time to get it done.
It will also ensure, if you're giving an editor a fairly clean copy, that you'll be able to get an editor again. You want to make sure that if you do like Molly says, or if you do like Molly says not to do, which is just giving them something that you haven't read, it's not their job. If you just assume it's their job, they might do a book for you, but it's going to cost you a lot, and they probably won't do another one for you. And editors tend to talk to other editors, and so you want to make sure that you're putting your best foot forward. You want to develop that good reputation with editors. So the one thing that I would say that not to do is not to give up, not to give into the temptation to say that this is boring and I'm going to stop, or do I really have to do this? Yes, yes, you do. You really have to do it. So don't give up. Don't be overwhelmed. Don't get overwhelmed. Take it one piece at a time. Allow yourself several days / weeks / months, depending on how much time you can invest into it, to complete a project. Obviously, if it's a short story, you're going to get through it a lot faster than it is if it's a 105,000 word novel. But make sure that you are not giving up, and that you are taking the appropriate amount of time. So, anything else, ladies?
I would recommend a do, which is keep a thesaurus handy. We had on prior podcasts also talked about the emotions thesaurus, the I can't remember the other ones, but they're great handy books. The emotion thesaurus is the first one that comes to mind. There's a set of 4 of them. Keep something available, whether it's your phone or the thesaurus, so that you can choose other words, so you're not falling in love with that passionate word that you love that's suddenly overused. You need to find a way. If you have to use the same descriptor, you can describe it different ways. She nodded, his head bobbed, he turned, he winked, he smiled, things like that. My character smiled way too much in the beginning. They just smiled and nodded and breathed too much. So they learned how to stop breathing, take that out. But there's books, or there's tools on your phone, apps on your phone. Keep those available so you have multiple word choices, so it doesn't sound so redundant.
I would also encourage you guys to look for small differences. Not everybody smiles the same. So if everybody's smiling, what kind of a smile is it? Is it a half smile? Is it a smirk? Is it a grin? Is it a pained smile? Is it a toothy smile? I don't know. You don't want to get too crazy with it. But if you can use that as kind of a character quirk, I like to give my characters little quirks, tugging at the button on their cuff, or straightening their tie, or snapping their fingers when they're nervous, or biting their lip, or whatever the case may be. I have a character who constantly clears their throat. Just little things that you can come back to often, because they do it often. But you want to find that balance of, I want to show that it's a repetitive action, but I don't want to beat the reader over the head with it. So that's another thing that I like to do.
I think too, if you're a plotter versus a pantser, you're going to have different things to look for in your macro editing as well. I think for pantsers, or what I like to call organic writers, because that just sounds better than pantser. Yes. I think we need to watch our plot lines and make sure that our arcs are followed and that we're going through the regular structure of a story. Because as an organic writer, I like to go off on little rabbit trails that are really interesting, but they have nothing to do with driving the action forward, heading toward a climax, and reaching that and going to the denouement of the story and the resolution. So making sure that you follow that story arc is also just as important as the fine details of editing.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Making sure you cut out any loose ends, things that you've, story threads that you've started that you have not finished weaving into the tapestry of your overall piece, trying to pull those out. Maybe save those for later. It's a very good point. Very good point. There we go. Other comments?
One last thing is to take a look at your character names. A lot of my characters in the beginning, there was 2 characters that started with the letter J, 2 that started with the letter L. Characters either had 4 letters or 5 letters, two syllables. So there was a lot of repetitive patterns that for me didn't matter, but for a lot of the other, for my alpha readers, they were getting confused. because they're reading through it a little fast, which is what I wanted from an original reader for the story, not for them to edit it. So once that was brought to light, you know, you change the characters' names a little bit, and it just flows better. It makes it more coherent for the reader to understand.
You got it. All right. Well, I think that's everything that we wanted to say about this. So we are, I guess, are going to sign off. It's been a while since we've recorded one of these. So, yes. Oh, I knew I was forgetting something. If you would like to find us, you can find me at aarongansky.com. You can find Molly Jo at frankly-my-dear-mojo.com. And Tina, is it just tinayeager.com?
That's it. Exactly.
Nice and easy. So for those of you listening to the audio only, it is Yeager. So Tina is spelled
Aaron!
QFPTR.
No, it's not. It's not.
Alpha, beta, gamma. No, it's Tina's
I'll
spelled.
let the editor, Molly, spell for me.
So Tina is common spelling, TINAYEAGER.com, and you can find Aaron at IamAJerk.net.
That's right. That's right. Not .com. That's a different website altogether.
That's it, exactly. One final housekeeping note. Follow us on YouTube. Give us a thumbs up. Share the bejeebies out of this video podcast and all of our other episodes, and please help spread the word.
All right. So we thank you all for listening, and until next time, good writing.